nobody talks about who actually built Las Vegas. Not who financed it. Not who owns the casinos. Who physically built it. Who poured the concrete, framed the walls, ran the electrical, laid the pipe, finished the interiors of every hotel tower that went up on the Strip from the 1980s onward. The answer is Mexican workers and Mexican contractors, and the story of how they got there, how they stayed, and what they built is one of the most important untold stories in American economic history. Las Vegas in 1950 was a small desert city of about 25,000 people. By 2000 it was approaching 2 million. That growth, one of the fastest urban expansions in American history, required construction on a scale that the local labor market could not supply. Hotels, casinos, highways, residential developments, shopping centers, schools, hospitals, water infrastructure, power infrastructure. The Nevada desert was being converted into a metropolis at a speed that demanded an enormous, flexible, and affordable construction workforce that simply did not exist locally. Someone had to fill that gap. Mexican workers filled it. They came first through networks. A worker from Michoacán or Jalisco or Zacatecas arrives in Las Vegas in the late 1970s or early 1980s, finds work on a construction site, learns the trade, and sends word back home. His cousin comes. His brother-in-law comes. His neighbor comes. Within a few years there is a cluster of workers from the same town, the same village, sometimes the same street, all working in Las Vegas construction, all sending remittances home, all maintaining the social network that will bring the next wave. This is how Mexican labor migration has always worked. Not through formal programs or government policy but through the organic spread of information along family and community lines. Someone goes first. It works. Everyone follows. By the 1990s, Las Vegas was in the middle of the greatest construction boom in its history. The Mirage opened in 1989, the first of the mega-resort casinos that would define the modern Strip, built at a cost of $630 million and employing a construction workforce that included thousands of Mexican workers. Then came Treasure Island, the MGM Grand, the Luxor, the Monte Carlo, New York, Mandalay Bay, the Venetian, the Bellagio. Each of these properties was a construction project of extraordinary scale and complexity, involving thousands of workers across dozens of trades over periods of 2 to 4 years. The Bellagio alone, which opened in 1998 at a cost of $1.6 billion, was at the time the most expensive hotel ever built. Someone had to build it. Mexican workers and Mexican-owned subcontractors built enormous portions of it and of every other major project on the Strip during that decade. What most people do not know is that this was not just labor. It was not just Mexican workers showing up to swing hammers under the direction of Anglo contractors. It was Mexican entrepreneurship, Mexican capital formation, Mexican business development happening in parallel with the labor migration. As Mexican workers accumulated experience and skills in the Las Vegas construction industry through the 1980s and into the 1990s, some of them began forming their own companies. Drywall contractors. Framing contractors. Concrete contractors. Finishing contractors. Small operations at first, a truck and a crew and a cell phone and a relationship with a general contractor who needed reliable subcontractors at competitive prices. Then larger operations as the relationships deepened and the reputation built and the capital accumulated. The drywall industry in Las Vegas became particularly dominated by Mexican-owned businesses. Drywall installation is one of the most labor-intensive trades in construction, requiring large crews working quickly and with precision across enormous floor plates. The major hotel projects of the 1990s needed thousands of drywall installers working around the clock on accelerated schedules. Mexican contractors could supply those crews because they had access to the labor networks that extended back to sending communities in Mexico and because they had the cultural and linguistic capacity to manage large Spanish-speaking workforces in ways that Anglo contractors often could not. The general contractors building the mega-resorts figured this out quickly and the Mexican subcontractors grew with the projects. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the Mexican construction community in Las Vegas had developed a parallel economic ecosystem that most people in the city were completely unaware of. There were Mexican-owned supply companies selling materials to Mexican-owned contractors. Mexican-owned restaurants and food trucks feeding the construction workers. Mexican-owned money transfer businesses sending the wages back to families in Michoacán and Zacatecas. Mexican-owned legal services helping workers navigate immigration and labor disputes. Mexican-owned insurance agencies. Mexican-owned car dealerships. The construction industry was the engine, but the economic activity it generated spread outward into a self-sustaining community economy that was invisible to the casino executives and hotel developers who depended on it. The construction of City Center, the massive mixed-use development on the Strip that MGM Resorts built between 2006 and 2009 at a cost of $8.5 billion, is the most dramatic example of what Mexican construction workers and contractors had become by that point. City Center was the largest privately financed construction project in American history at the time of its completion. It employed at its peak approximately 12,000 construction workers. Independent estimates suggested that somewhere between 40% and 60% of the construction workforce on City Center was Hispanic, the overwhelming majority of them Mexican or Mexican American. The concrete alone, the foundations, the cores, the structural elements of multiple skyscrapers rising simultaneously in the desert, required a concrete workforce of extraordinary size and skill. Mexican workers poured it. But the story of Las Vegas is not only the story of the Strip. The residential construction boom that accompanied the casino expansion was in many ways even larger in its total scope and even more completely dependent on Mexican labor and Mexican contractors. Between 1990 and 2006, Las Vegas added roughly 40,000 new housing units per year. 40,000 homes annually, in a desert, for 16 consecutive years. Single-family homes, townhouses, apartment complexes, master-planned communities spreading outward from the Strip into Henderson and Summerlin and North Las Vegas. Every one of those homes required framing, roofing, plumbing, electrical, drywall, painting, flooring, landscaping. The workforce that did all of that work was Mexican in proportions that ranged from substantial to near total depending on the trade. In some trades, framing and drywall and stucco in particular, the workforce was so overwhelmingly Mexican that the sites operated entirely in Spanish, with Anglo project managers who either learned enough Spanish to communicate or relied on bilingual Mexican foremen to manage the crews. The housing collapse of 2007 and 2008 hit the Mexican construction community in Las Vegas with particular severity. The city had been one of the epicenters of the subprime lending boom, and it became one of the epicenters of the foreclosure crisis. Construction stopped almost overnight. Projects that were underway were halted. Projects that were planned were canceled. The pipeline of work that had sustained tens of thousands of Mexican construction workers and hundreds of Mexican-owned subcontracting companies dried up within a matter of months. Workers who had built their lives around Las Vegas construction were suddenly unemployed in a city where the only major industry besides construction was hospitality, which was also contracting as the recession hit consumer spending. Many workers left. They went back to Mexico, or they followed construction work to other markets, to Texas, to Colorado, to the recovering markets in California. The Mexican-owned contractors who had built substantial businesses through the boom years faced the same existential question that every construction company faces in a severe downturn: how to survive a period of zero revenue while maintaining the relationships and the operational capacity that would allow them to compete when the market recovered. Some did not survive. Others cut to the bone, maintained their licenses and their relationships and their equipment, and waited. The market recovered. Las Vegas construction resumed in the early 2010s and accelerated through the middle of the decade. The same workforce, somewhat reduced but fundamentally intact as a community, came back to build the next wave. The T-Mobile Arena. The Las Vegas Raiders Stadium, Allegiant Stadium, a $1.9 billion NFL venue completed in 2020 that required a construction workforce of approximately 10,000 workers, and that was built with Mexican and Mexican-American labor comprising a substantial portion of every major trade on the project. The MSG Sphere, the extraordinary entertainment venue that opened in 2023 as the largest spherical structure in the world, built at a cost of $2.3 billion. The construction of a Formula One street circuit through the streets of Las Vegas. The ongoing expansion of the convention center, the renovation of legacy properties, the constant churn of remodeling and upgrading that a city built on the premise of perpetual novelty requires continuously. What has also happened over the past 30 years is generational. The Mexican workers who arrived in Las Vegas in the 1980s and built the first generation of mega resorts have children and grandchildren who grew up in Las Vegas, went to Las Vegas schools, attended UNLV or Nevada State, and entered the workforce as American citizens with educations and credentials and networks that their parents and grandparents did not have. Some of them went into construction, becoming the licensed contractors and project managers and estimators and engineers that their parents' generation could not have been. Some of them went into law and medicine and finance and education. The remittance economy that their parents sustained, sending money back to Michoacán and Zacatecas, has been replaced in the second and third generation by wealth accumulation within Las Vegas itself, by homeownership and business ownership and professional careers in the city that their families helped build. The Mexican community in Las Vegas today is approximately 350,000 people, roughly a quarter of the metropolitan area's total population. It is not a community of recent arrivals living precariously at the margins of the city's economy. It is a multi-generational community with deep roots in every industry that makes Las Vegas function, not just construction but hospitality, food service, healthcare, retail, education, government. The workers who poured the concrete for the Bellagio in 1996 have grandchildren in Las Vegas high schools today. The contractors who built City Center have children running their own construction companies. The community that was invisible to the casino executives who hired their labor has become an inextricable part of the city's economic and social fabric. None of this is in the official story of Las Vegas. The official story is about the mob and Howard Hughes and Steve Wynn and the architects who designed the buildings and the entertainers who filled the showrooms and the gamblers who funded everything. It is a story about spectacle and capital and American excess. It is not a story about the people who made the spectacle physically possible, who took the architect's drawings and turned them into steel and concrete and glass rising out of the Nevada desert. Those people were Mexican. They built one of the most visited cities on earth and they did it without anyone writing their story down. That is what invisible labor looks like at scale. Not exploitation in the simple sense, though exploitation existed and continues to exist in the wages and working conditions of construction workers across the industry. But something more complex than that. A community that built something enormous, that developed skills and businesses and capital and generational depth in the process, that is now woven into the city so completely that removing it would be unthinkable, and that remains almost entirely unknown to the tens of millions of tourists who walk through the buildings it built every year, running their hands along the marble and looking up at the ceilings and never once asking who put it there. Now you know.